What's happening? You got the Retro Gaming Hippie, and we are time warping back to 1982, or more specifically for me, 1986. 1982 is when the Commodore 64 was released, which oddly enough was the same year that the ColecoVision was released. Now, the ColecoVision in 1982 I had as a kid. We were much more of a gaming family, so it made sense for us to have that hooked up to the big TV back then. We didn't acquire something like the Commodore 64 until 1986. This was more something that sat on a side table with an old CRT monitor, not a Commodore 64 monitor like I was able to acquire, and I'll talk about it a little bit. Some old CRT 64, some coax connections, strictly to play video games on. Probably got it at a swap meet or flea market. Roughly 1986 is what I'm guessing, judging by the games that I really enjoyed playing, and that was when they were made. And so in terms of 1986, the hippie was a 49er fan. I had less hair here, more hair up here, but the Macho Man would have been on Saturday night's main event in the background, much like he is when I'm playing my games right now. Or maybe a mixtape of something from the 80s, like, The Cure, Depeche Mode. But for now, we're going to talk about the Commodore 64. Now, the monitor itself is a Commodore 64 model. It has the AV connections in the back, or maybe just standard computer monitor connections, which are the red, yellow, and white. It's got two yellow and white ones on the back as well. It has a nice little flip down here to adjust color and setting and things of that nature. I've only worked on doing the volume. It says Commodore right here on the front. It's got a couple nice handles on the side to pick up, and move around. Of course, like old CRTs, it sticks out like you can't believe in the back. But it's a perfect size for what it needed to be. These were computers. These weren't video game systems. This was a computer, so it wasn't made to be on a big TV in the living room. It was made to be at a computer desk to operate, as games, but also to be as a computer and write programs or store files or things like that, which we're going to get to now. The next thing you're definitely going to want, and they're actually cheap to find on eBay. I got all these with this whole setup when I picked it up, but are blank floppy disks. They're going to store your information. You'll be swapping a lot of that in and out. You'll see what I mean when I do a review on my favorite D&D games, which is what I primarily bought the system for to play. The other thing, if you're going to be a gamer, and this is all from a gamer perspective, I'm a gamer, I'm not a computer person, you're going to want a joystick. In this case, I have a SpectraVision QuickShot, which quite a few years ago when I did a little road trip through Arizona, I was lucky enough to find two that were in box for $5. And now I'm starting to use it. And of course, you're going to need your disk drive, which is going to send information back and forth to the computer that's going to tell the TV what to do. A lot of my D&D games have you swapping disks in and out because it's a lot of information stored on a lot of disks. From a gamer perspective, I really like the Commodore 64 added a different variety that ColecoVision didn't. I like ColecoVision's graphics so far for what I play, but I play some pretty simple stuff. But even the Boppin' Wrestling game, which is one of the games I have that can be graphics driven, I just feel like the ColecoVision graphics are far crisper than the Commodore 64 ones are. But Commodore 64 added depth, which is something I'm going to go a lot more deeper into when I do a review of my favorite D&D games. It added depth in games that I hadn't seen before. I hadn't had a Quest game that I played. We didn't buy a Nintendo in 1985. And around 1986, I got a Commodore 64 instead. So, Final Fantasy might have had some depth in the RPG market as far as how you could make and create characters. But the Commodore 64 was my first big jump into it. Of course, that was done by swapping a lot of discs in and out. And it really doesn't have nearly as much depth to it for the amount of storage you're having to slide in and out compared to Final Fantasy, that's for sure. But this was also in terms of 1982. I just didn't see that until 1986. But as soon as I picked it up and played it, as soon as I heard that death rattle, and if you know anything about Commodore 64s, you know what I mean by the death rattle. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. I absolutely just loved it. And I remember playing it as a kid. I fired up some old wrestling, and there it was. Saturday night, 1986, had a little cherry Coke, little Cool Ranch Doritos, and I'm playing my D&D game, just like I remember. So definitely hit those spots on that. Now, if you're looking to pick one up, unless you're into soldering, I would definitely get one that works. I'm not having any issues whatsoever with this, but I really think unless you want to start soldering or removing components yourself, get one that works, because one that doesn't want to power on or things of that nature, who knows what it might be to fix. They don't seem to be too bad to fix. I did have the lever on the disk drive for me that locks the disk into place to be read. That lever kind of went limp on me. It was just flopping up and down. I opened it up, which was just like 6 Phillips head screwdrivers, really easy to access. It was just a little rod that I could just slide right back in and put together. So it seems to be fairly simple as far as getting access and what's probably in there. However, soldering is soldering. If you don't have a setup, you don't have a setup. If you're not comfortable with it, you're not comfortable with it. It's not just turning a screwdriver. So I definitely recommend getting one that works. First of all, I would recommend getting a monitor too. I think it's getting harder and harder to find CRTVs anyway. I don't go and look for them at garage sales myself, nor do I notice them or at thrift stores. They're probably not the easiest thing to find anymore. There's probably a certain market out there as well that people are charging more money for. So if you can get one, a complete setup, definitely recommend it. The other really cool thing is, and I might get deeper into this as I keep it, is the licensing they did for this. I haven't explored it completely, but I know there's at least a Thundercats game, which I don't know if they've released that on any kind of platform. Definitely not back in this time frame. They didn't. I'm sure they did something, later on. But in this time frame, Thundercats, when that was big on the cartoons, this is the game you had for it. I wonder if they did a Crystar game, which is something I liked, or Jason the Wheeled Warriors, or gosh, I'm sure they did a Voltron. I know they did some Friday the 13th and Freddy's, but I mean, there was just so much licensing across the board for games for this, that where if you were a complete across the board collector of certain things like He-Man, like me, or wrestling, I'm going to want the games for this. Regardless if I play the game or not, I'm just going to maybe want that game to say, it's WWF. Yeah, I don't have a laser disc player, but I have some laser discs of WWF because they were a good deal and I came across them. I haven't really explored the library to see how cheap the games are. My D&D games I felt were very affordable because there was something that I really wanted, and it was something I knew I'd thoroughly enjoy. So, and compared to something like Nintendo, I would say that they were like Super Mario 3. It's a great game that people love and they're going to want to get. And that's about the price I paid for the D&D games is what you're going to pay for Super Mario 3, more than likely. So it seems to be pretty affordable in that market. So if you're on the cusp of thinking about trying to get one of these, or you're really going to reconnect with the way you did as a kid, I think you will. I mean, like I said, as soon as I fired it up and started playing it, as a gamer, I went right back to being a kid. If you took it beyond gaming and just did that simple programming or whatnot, I'm sure you would snap right back into it and start to remember what you did and why you enjoyed it. So I highly recommend a Commodore 64. I'm glad I did. I can't wait to review my D&D games, which I've been playing quite a bit. Some of them I've already solved, but I'm going to play them again. So remember, this is Retro Gaming Hippie. I don't buy nostalgia because I am nostalgia.